The birth of Operation Raspberry. Resistance inside the Royal Navy was unmistakable. Senior officers clung to their long-held theories of convoy defense and gave little weight to alternatives, insisting that escorts should stay tight, sweep outward, and chase contacts at the edges. The centerpiece of this defensive thinking was Walker's Buttercup tactic, once hailed as innovative. But on WATU's boards, Buttercup collapsed. It assumed U-boats lingered outside convoys, when in fact the attackers were already deep inside. To the team in Liverpool, it was plain that doctrine rooted in the wrong assumptions could never succeed. Yet their corrections were too often dismissed as speculation by men convinced that only seasoned sea commanders could dictate how to fight the enemy. Inside the hidden room, frustration mounted. Reports arrived week after week showing freighters burning at sea, while the official countermeasures failed to show results. Each recreation confirmed that chasing ghosts outside the conv left U-boats free to strike at its heart. The Liverpool group knew that continuing to apply the same failing methods was squandering lives. The need for something new became urgent, and the burden of devising it fell squarely on their shoulders. Among those shoulders was Jean Laidlaw's. At only 21, and with training as a chartered accountant, she seemed an unlikely figure to reshape convoy tactics. Yet she had been the very first Wren recruited into the unit by Vera Laughton-Matthews, who selected women for their analytical skill rather than secretarial talent. Laidlaw possessed a natural ability to think in sequences and patterns, and most important, she did not inherit tradition's blind spots. Where older officers relied on instinct, she transformed fragments of reports and calculations into repeatable tests. Night after night, she joined Roberts in running scenarios, watching as U-boats on the boards attacked, submerged, and then waited patiently until escorts had passed overhead before surfacing astern to begin again. The picture was consistent. The convoys needed a way to sweep clear the waters behind them just as the submarines chose to resurface. Laidlaw, working with Roberts, sketched a solution in geometric form. Rather than scattering escorts outward at random, positioned them to move as a group, fanning behind the conv in triangular sweeps. In this net-like pattern, overlapping sonar beams increased the chance of finding a submarine before it could rejoin the fight. To make the trap more effective, they added the firing of star shells, bright flares casting arcs of light across the sea for 10 or 12 minutes, forcing any U-boat to either stay submerged, drained of speed and oxygen, or to risk surfacing under illumination. First, the design seemed unorthodox, even unsafe. Escorts appeared to be peeling away from their charges at the very moment an attack might occur. But on the boards, the calculations spoke clearly. Time after time, U-boats resurfacing in the convoy's wake were thrown into the paths of those sweeping escorts. Where Buttercup failed, the new triangles consistently closed a trap. Where once submarines had slipped back into the night unhindered, now they were spotted, engaged, or at least held at depth. There was clear evidence of a viable counter. When it came time to name the maneuver, Laidlaw offered her own suggestion. She called it Raspberry, a pointed joke, a derisive sound at Hitler and his submarine arm. The levity hid a serious purpose. In Liverpool, to bestow that mocking title on a formal tactic was to declare independence from the rigid style of admiralty thinking, to prove that the Wrens' unconventional perspective could reshape naval combat. The name stuck, perhaps because it carried the same audacity as the maneuver itself. Operation Raspberry was no longer just chalk marks on boards, but a tangible idea ready to be argued before the highest command. Still, ideas alone altered nothing. To matter, Raspberry needed admiralty approval. That meant convincing men uninterested in theories produced by chalk and wooden markers. The prospect of presenting the plan to senior officers was tense. Many wondered whether captains would ever accept being taught new tactics by women younger than most of their sailors. Yet Roberts prepared carefully for the moment, aware that without endorsement, weeks of refinement would remain locked in Liverpool. When Admiral Percy Noble visited the unit, the atmosphere grew taut. Here was a commander who had doubted the value of wargaming, holding in his hands the ability to dismiss the work entirely. The Wrens laid out the conv, shifted escort markers into triangular positions, and waited as the submarine tokens made their play. Then came the counter-move. Escorts swept behind in practiced arcs, star shells rising in imagined bursts. Again and again, the U-boats were trapped in the very zone they had once exploited with impunity. Noble watched quietly, then insisted on multiple reruns of the scenario. Each time, the pattern worked. At last, acknowledgement crossed his expression. What had looked eccentric hours before now stood as a solution too consistent to ignore. With that, the first barrier began to fall. Later, Admiral Max Horton, who had replaced Noble as Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, would witness similar demonstrations and lend his backing as well. The combination carried decisive weight. After Roberts and his team showed Raspberry directly to these senior officers, the move was authorized for the fleet. Within days, the maneuver was written into signals, coded for dispatch, and distributed across escort groups. What had begun as a sequence of chalk lines had become an operational order. Convoy commanders now carried with them the option of setting the Raspberry in motion on the open sea. For the Wrens, the satisfaction was profound, though tempered by reality. A diagram could convince an admiral, but only a convoy under fire could prove the tactic in practice. For now, Raspberry was a plan on paper, accepted at last, but untested against real torpedoes and real chaos. The next step was unavoidable. Officers had to learn how to execute it under pressure, to drill until its movements were second nature. That responsibility fell upon the very unit that had invented it, as they now turned from invention to the equally daunting work of training those who would carry it into battle. Training a fleet in secret. The task of turning Raspberry from theory into practice began in Liverpool, where a steady stream of officers arrived each week to undergo training that was as secretive as it was demanding. To them, it appeared little more than another course in convoy defense, but inside the Western Approaches tactical unit, the aim ran deeper, to change the very way they thought about fighting U-boats. Convincing whether beaten commanders of that change was never straightforward. Many arrived certain their instincts were enough, only to be brought up short on the linoleum floor. The first time a senior officer attempted Raspberry, the demonstration sank quickly into silence. His escorts scattered too wide, the triangular sweep bent off course, and the small wooden submarine slid away untouched. Resetting the blocks, he tried again, and failed the same way. Men who had spent years braving gales and torpedoes found themselves humbled by chalk marks and counters. They grumbled that no real ship would be ordered to behave so loosely. The Wrens, overseeing the game, said little, only setting the board back to starting positions. The message was clear enough. Here, mistakes did not bring reprimands, but nor did past service shield anyone from failure. Such moments were common in the early sessions. Officers trained to hunt outside convoys could not easily imagine threats lurking within. Their instincts urged them to charge outward at every contact, leaving submarines hidden in the columns untouched. The purpose of the exercise, therefore, was to break habit. Captain Roberts reminded each class in the same words, "Make your mistakes here on the oilcloth, and you won't make them at sea." In Liverpool, failure was acceptable, even expected, because every miss on the board meant one fewer in the Atlantic. The mechanics of the training reinforced that lesson. Officers stood behind canvas screens, so they saw only what a real commander could from a bridge. Across the map, Rens moved counters for escorts and merchants, while the U-boat's path was drawn in green chalk, invisible to the trainees. Only when a sonar operator marker made a correct sweep did a fragment of that hidden track appear. Torpedoes fired were marked in white, sudden lines cutting through the conv without warning. And always, the clock ticked in 2-minute turns, the same rhythm of decision-making demanded at sea. The routine was neither abstract nor leisurely. It forced command under pressure, as close to reality as boards and chalk could make it. Each day ran to the same relentless pace. Mornings began with lectures on sonar bearings, triangle geometry, and the principles behind the maneuver itself. Afternoons were spent in rehearsals on the floor, the Wrens correcting errors and replaying sequences until movements settled into muscle memory. Evenings brought longer exercises, sometimes dragging past midnight, when entire convoy battles were fought out in compressed time. Men left the room drained, only to return again at morning call. Raspberry could not be delivered by a written order. It had to be wired into instinct, so that under spray and gunfire, a commander would move his escorts without hesitation into their triangular sweeps. WATU ran week-long courses for officers. About 5,000 were trained from 1942 to 1945. Each week brought a new group of up to 50 through the door, and each departed with more than theory. They carried a common doctrine that would unify escort groups drawn from many different nations. Canadians, Americans, Norwegians, Free French, and others all stood on the same linoleum, absorbing the same rhythms of thought. Where once a multinational convoy risked confusion, now officers shared a vocabulary of signals, sweeps, and expectations, drilled until consistent. Such standardization was as important as the tactic itself, for in waters vast enough to scatter entire fleets, coherence mattered as much as firepower. Inevitably, pride bent under the weight of repetition. Some veterans, after early failures, admitted aloud that they had been steering at ghosts. Others found themselves thinking the way Roberts intended, not as escorts, but as submariners. Each turn began with the unspoken question, what would a U-boat captain do next? Where would he seek an angle? Where would he run once discovered? Gradually, escorts ceased reacting blindly and began to anticipate. Those who had once scoffed at games concluded by acknowledging they had been fighting the wrong kind of war. Such reversals were whispered around the unit, testimonials that thought itself had been refitted. The board results reflected that change. At first, the small submarine block slipped through almost every exercise, firing spreads and vanishing with ease. By the later days of each course, escorts coordinated properly, sweeping astern in patterns that overlapped, driving attackers down and pinning them to surfaces where depth charges could fall. The shift could be counted in game ratios. Failure gave way to repeated successes until the hunters appeared less like phantoms and more like opponents susceptible to reason. Survival ceased to be a matter of luck. It became something officers could influence with disciplined moves. Secrecy cloaked the process. To the public, Liverpool was a city of air raids and dockyards, not war games. Little trace of the training appeared in newspapers or communiques. The precautions were deliberate. To announce a new convoy tactic risked alerting the very submariners they hoped to ambush. So the courses proceeded quietly, class after class filing in and out across 3 years. Few outside Derby House understood that on those chalked floors were rehearsed the habits that would decide whether shipments of wheat, oil, and ammunition ever reached their destination. This effort was recognized privately at high command. Admiral Max Horton later sent thanks to those involved, praising WATU as vital to the eventual outcome. Admiral Noble wrote similarly, reflecting that if the Atlantic battle had been lost, the war itself would have been in jeopardy, and that WATU had helped prevent that fate. But for the officers who passed through the course, the more tangible evidence lay in their own change of mindset. They had faced failure, rebuilt habits, and left with confidence in a maneuver that felt at last like a weapon equal to the threat. Yet chalk encounters could only demonstrate so far. Convoys still faced nightly danger, and every run across the Atlantic carried the same mortal stakes. In Liverpool, the escorts had learned to defeat submarines on the mat. What remained unknown was whether those lessons would hold when black water closed around hulls and the horizon lit with fire. The answer would not wait long. The real test lay ahead, at sea, with a convoy numbered SC-104. Convoy SC-104, the first test. Convoy SC-104 crossed the North Atlantic under some of the worst conditions its escorts had yet faced. Nearly 50 merchant ships, burdened with food, oil, and steel for Britain, stretched into the storm with only a half-dozen escorts holding guard. Heavy seas battered the hulls, freezing spray smothered decks, and watch crews struggled against exhaustion. Normally, such weather might have shielded the formation, but this night nature betrayed them. Curtains of auroral light bent across the horizon, washing the convoy in a pale glow that made every ship stand out. To those on watch, it was not spectacle but exposure. They were a beacon against the black Atlantic, and every man knew U-boats could see them from miles away. The attackers had already found them. Wolfpacks trailing for days had struck at the convoy's outer edges, picking off stragglers with ruthless efficiency. Explosions flashed across the sea, and debates spread through the crews in whispers. If torpedoes could find them even inside the formation, what hope remained? Britain's needs demanded the convoy press on regardless, but morale sagged. Men pictured unseen predators weaving among them, hungry for another chance to fire. In the middle of that night, Commander Ralph Hithot faced a decision few had rehearsed. Doctrine insisted that escorts stay tight and drive outward against any bearing, sweeping the periphery for attackers thought to circle from beyond. But recent reports from Liverpool's Western Approaches Tactical Unit suggested those assumptions were wrong. The alternative, Operation Raspberry, looked reckless on paper. It required escorts to pull away from their precious charges, opening gaps some captains believed suicidal, and fan out into triangular arcs behind the convoy. The promise was that submarines, following their most successful pattern of attack, would be caught surfacing astern or forced to stay deep as the trap tightened. The logic came from games run by Wrens with chalk and counters, not proven battle practice. Yet with merchantmen already lost, Hithot knew repeating standard doctrine meant little but more wreckage in the storm. He gave the order, commence Raspberry. To merchant skippers, the sudden change was alarming. The escort destroyers swung away and streamed toward the convoy's wake, their silhouettes disappearing into rain and spray. It seemed, for a moment, as if the convoy had been abandoned, but from the escorts came the thunder of star shells firing into the sky, casing the ocean in harsh halos of light that cut through the auroral glow. Below deck, sonar operators bent over their headsets, searching the depths astern with the practiced patience drilled into them at Liverpool. The noise was punishing, wind across the surface, the constant pulse of screws, the distant crash of waves. In that cacophony, a single echo could make the difference between safety and loss. Seconds scraped into minutes, and silence weighted every man. Some thought they had been sent on a fool's errand, stretching thin while submarines closed from the flanks. Then one operator stiffened. Faint, uncertain, but there. It was not random surf or metal debris. The rhythm repeated, steady and deliberate, a sound no storm could fake. He called contact. Another set confirmed. Bearings aligned. A submarine lay inside the sweep, just where WATU's boards predicted it would be. Hithot gave the order. Engines adjusted, depth charges primed, crews at stations braced against the spray. A run was made across the suspected position, charges rolled free into the black water, and moments later detonated with muffled thunder that shook through decks as though the ocean itself had convulsed. Foam erupted aft, men thrown against bulkheads by the concussive roll. The convoy behind staggered but held course. More charges followed. Systematic patterns dropped to keep the prey pinned down. Reports later revealed what those men only sensed in the moment. The submarine had taken heavy damage, its patrol ruined. It limped away toward base, unable to continue the hunt. It was not a kill, and no wreckage confirmed its end, but withdrawing a boat from the fight was victory enough. The conv carried on under the auroral sky, fewer losses than circumstance had promised. For the first time, Raspberry, tested against real steel and torpedoes, had bent the odds in the Allies' favor. Relief seeped across the escorts. After years absorbing blows, they had struck back with method rather than chance. Exhausted sailors shared thin smiles, not in celebration but in recognition. Something in the balance had shifted. Senior officers reading the after-action reports later saw the same point, stripped of emotion. A new tactic, devised in Liverpool by Wrens and skeptics, had forced an attacking submarine to retreat where accepted doctrine had failed. That was enough to push doubt aside. Raspberry was not a game. It had proven itself under the harshest test possible. Convoy SC-104 was not the end of the battle, nor the last convoy to lose ships to Wolfpacks, but it marked a subtle turning point. For once, escorts had wrested initiative from the hunters, and the proof of this success, written into official signals, began to spread across the Atlantic theater. It was no longer argument, it was combat testimony. Outcomes like this provided exactly the evidence Admiralty needed to integrate Raspberry into wider doctrine, moving it from experiment to accepted practice. What followed would be tracked not only in stories of ships that escaped destruction, but in the ledgers of men studying results. Over time, these engagements left a trail of figures, losses, tonnage delivered, submarines forced away, that gave a clearer picture than any single night at sea could provide.